What you are hearing is an actual ancient Greek composition from around 500 BCE. It is being played on a kitara, a kind of ancient guitar. Music played a big role in Greek society. I mean, sure, it was used in festivals, at parties, and famously as a way for epic poets to pass on heroic stories. But music was more than entertainment, it was a philosophy. Music affects people in ways we can never fully understand, making us feel things without even needing words. So it's no surprise that music was a major part of early Greek education. In fact, young boys started learning music as part of their formal education around the age of 6 and likely continued until they were 18 years old. This phase of schooling, called Mousike, included more than just learning how to play an instrument. Philosophers believed that music was important for preparing the brain to learn, for aligning souls with the universe. If you wanted to learn more about the laws that ruled nature, you had to experience those laws working within yourself. You had to listen to music. It's hard to say exactly when music became such an important part of Greek culture. We have examples of characters playing music in some of the earliest pieces of Greek literature, including the Iliad and Odyssey, which were written around the 8th century BCE, but were set even earlier in the 12th century. Apparently, the philosopher and mathematician Pythagoras developed an early version of music theory in the 6th century, but none of these works survive. Mousike was part of what the playwright Aristophanes called the Old Education, or the style of teaching that was popular before the philosophers set up their schools at the end of the 5th century BCE. By the time Aristophanes wrote his plays, the Old Education had been established in Athens for a long time. While there were two parts to this Old Education, Mousike and Gymnastike, or physical education, we have reason to believe that music was taught first. The most obvious part of Mousike education was, of course, the music. There were a number of ancient Greek musical instruments, such as the lyre, the kitara, the syrinx, and the aeolus. Singing was also super popular, but we'll talk more about that later. Music teachers were generally called kitaristes, but they could teach any aspect of the Mousike education. Music lessons were about more than just learning how to play music, though. It was believed that music was crucial to developing the mind. In fact, they thought that learning musical rhythm was kind of the same as training yourself to be mentally graceful. If you could produce something beautiful on an instrument, then surely you could do the same in your regular life. Ancient Greeks were also very spiritual about their music. They felt that making music was the closest thing humans could get to perfection. They believed that music must be beautiful because it abided by divine laws of the universe. So, when notes sounded good together in a melody or a harmony, they believed it was proof that the universe followed a pattern. Ancient Greek philosophers spent a lot of time trying to figure out why certain notes sounded pleasant, and they used these discoveries to make theories about the human mind. If they could figure out why certain notes went well together, then they could use that logic to determine the relationship of other things in the universe. Musicians also put a lot of thought into how music affects its listeners. The Greeks used a variety of scales, called modes, many of which are still used in music theory today. Philosophers believed that each mode inspired a different emotion in its listener. For this reason, some, like Plato, argued that people should be very careful about what kinds of music they listened to. If a song inspired someone to be brave or virtuous, then it could be very helpful to prepare their mind to learn. On the other hand, if a song caused them to be angry or vengeful, then maybe it was best not to play that song at all. Plato also thought it was important to control what kinds of music children could listen to. He was a big supporter for educational music, that is, songs for little kids that taught them good lessons about the world. Plato recognized that even though these songs might be fantastical or overly simplistic, music was still a good way to get kids thinking about morals from a young age. Think of modern nursery rhymes like the Itsy Bitsy Spider. On the surface, the song really doesn't have that much meaning, but to a little kid, it might teach perseverance. Plato believed that introducing morals to children through song was a good way to educate even the youngest members of society. But there were other aspects to ancient Greek music. Like I mentioned earlier, singing was a big deal, not only in training your soul, but just in daily life. Women were known to sing to pass the time, bards often provided entertainment at feasts by singing epic myths, and the first plays were even told entirely through song. Singing and dancing were also super important in religious rituals, like funerals, festivals, and worship rites, such as the infamous Bacchic cult of Dionysus. But just because something was taught in the Mousike education doesn't mean it was actually musical. Learning how to read and write were also major parts of the Mousike education. It's hard to know exactly how much of Mousike was played on an instrument and how much of it was learning how to read, because the two skills were usually talked about together. That is, until the end of the 5th century, when reading and writing were slowly separated to form a third branch of education, grammata, or grammar. Now, grammata and Mousike were always connected, even once grammata became its own separate subject. They were known as the intellectual subjects, or the ones that trained your mind, while gymnastike trained your body. But why did grammata only become its own subject in the 5th century? I mean, the Greeks had been writing in stone and papyrus for centuries, ever since the Mycenaean civilization had documented their trade inventories in clay tablets. Well, many scholars believe that this increase in literacy was due to the expansion of democracy in Athens. Suddenly, when the government wrote things down, ordinary people needed to be able to read it. These included laws carved into stone's daily monuments, written contracts between citizens, and official state documents with other cities. Writing was also used by the common man. People making sacrifices to the gods often brought small votive offerings, usually inscribed with the name of the person giving the gift and a prayer to the god. Finally, some of the most interesting writing preserved from ancient Greece comes from funerary inscriptions, or the poems and prayers written on tombstones to honor those who had died. People also used the literacy they gained during Mousike to achieve higher education. Instead of finding a teacher, people seeking to learn something new could just read a book that would teach them everything they needed to know. As we'll soon learn, this method of teaching was even used in schools to go over broader subjects, like history and geography. It's hard to know exactly how Mousike was taught to the young, but we do have some clues. In several of his dialogues, Plato shows young children at home learning letters with their parents and reading famous poems. As weird as it may sound, Mousike was essentially all the formal learning that most Greek citizens would ever get in their lives. Yes, there was still the second component to education, gymnastike, which we will talk about in the next video. But as far as training the mind went, Mousike was all they had. Music played such an important role in Greek life that knowing how to play and appreciate it was a benchmark for being educated. Even valuable life skills, like reading and writing, were still tied to Mousike. Music will always be popular, but for most people, it no longer has that same divine connection to the universe that it once had. Still, that's not to say that music is entirely useless today either. If you're ever feeling stressed or disconnected from your life, music can be a good way to ground yourself. Though Mousike may have lost some of its meaning in our culture, music's ability to influence the soul is undeniable.